Night, for being here. Other evenings, providing your input and feedback, online. The idea is to do what community sees as issues and, potential resolutions, so solutions. The other person I do want to credit, and I'm kind of looking out the window, State Rep, Steve Staffstrom, played a key role in getting funding to make this initial foray into, fixing Fairfield Avenue. But I know Steve had the special session today and, think he's gonna be here at some point, but, we'll see. He may be, still tied up. But that's an important, piece, and to know that really this is a large coordinated project between the city, between the NRC, our state rep, community. So these are I guess we're gonna hear the final preferred plans that DOT is kind of giving the blessings to. And Lindsay introduced some folks, but I do especially want to acknowledge Val Rossi from the NRZ, who's put in a lot of time and effort and thoughtful consideration as to where we are. So again, the whole idea is to make this a much better stretch of road where we are safe, where businesses can thrive, where families don't have to cower worrying about their kids crossing to and from school and all the rest of it. So enough from me. Miss Marissa Torello will take it from here.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out at the start of your summer. We've been here for over a year now. I'm a little sad because I think I was here right around the same time as the weather a year ago. To now give you final ideas and presentations based off of your feedback. And I want to pick up just really quickly with where we left off at the last public meeting. And I will do a summary and I will catch you up if you were not here. But for those that were here, the theme of this was, where do we have a trade-off? What are we going to give and what are we going to take and what's going to work for the corridor? So if you've been walking around or if you looked at anything, this is landing on a road diet right now. There is going to be some trade-offs. This is the culmination of a 1.5 year planning study. The key word is planning. So there's preferred alternatives in here, but there is still a well-documented path of how we got here, what other alternatives exist, and give you opportunities to continue to move this project forward as you seek funding for improvements. And as engineering comes on board, if something's not working for you or you need adjustments, just because it's laid out here, like this is what's going to get painted on your road tomorrow, there's still a path to get there. And there's still going to be more public opportunities as this goes into design for you to have that same level of feedback. So I just want to note to you that nothing we're showing here, if it didn't have your comment or it didn't address it, please still give your comment, and please still know that it's probably been recorded in the final draft report, which is also going to be online after this, that has a lot of written detail as to what the community's preferences were, what are other opportunities that might not show up on a plan. That will give you options for how this actually gets designed out. So this is a concept of what it could be based on your feedback, but the process doesn't stop here. Final is just the final of our work, sadly, at the moment, not your community or your project. You might just need to click instead of the on.
There we go.
Okay, so really quickly, how many people were at any of the other public engagement events? Okay, nearly everyone. So I will try to then go a little bit fast through the recap because it was nearly everyone, but I still want to just recap a little bit on how we got here. All right, so you can go ahead next one. All right, so the corridor team, we've talked a little bit enough about us as consultants, and you've heard from all the wonderful partners we had in moving us forward. But just very quickly, Connecticut DOT, this is their road. They have been involved in this process throughout. They provided comments on the draft report, and the final report will be based on their comments. But these concepts represent the comments we received from DOT and adjusted for them. So they've been involved throughout the process. So study goals. Improve safety. This was number one. This is what I told a lot of people today too, and throughout, is that we heard from you and we were brought into this study as that it was a safety study. The goal is to improve safety. It is to make it more multimodal and particularly safer for our vulnerable road users. And then improve traffic flow. This is not to make it so that you can drive faster. It's not gonna put less cars on the road. It's not a corridor study to try to just move vehicles. Improve traffic flow meant we were trying to smooth traffic flow, decrease driver frustration, and make this so that you drive at one consistent, reasonable speed throughout the corridor, not a racetrack. Study corridors, we have Fairfield Avenue, from the Bridgeport City line to 95, and Brewster Street from Ash Creek to Woodland Avenue. I do want to point out, and because it was brought up to me too, that Brewster Street doesn't have a full streetscape design the way Fairfield does on these boards. Brewster Street has a one-way conversion on the southern end of it that's shown, but it is a little bit of a lackluster on the boards because the Brewster Street to Ash Creek really carried up with one consistent corridor, which was, if you remember from the preferred alternatives, we only were able to have one alternative because of the width of that road. And so that's a two-way road with one side of parking that's formalized. You'll see more of a write-up on that. Please stay on the website. There's more of a write-up on Brewster Street and that improvement to Brewster Street, since it didn't have a lot of visual that needed to be shown. There's more of an explanation in the final and draft report online. So community feedback, we had an online pin drop survey. I hope all of you had a chance to look at it. We got nearly 500 responses on the pin drop survey. And then at the very first of our the second of our public engagement, we're actually here for our very first meeting, taking more comments and putting them all into the pin drop, which is what got us to the 500 comments. But then at our first official public meeting where I had a slide deck, at the very end of it, we had an activity where we had 6 boards up, if anyone remembers, and there were different themes, and we gave you dots and we said, go find your highest priorities. We had 6 key concerns: pedestrian safety, managing speed, on-street parking conflicts, improving bus stops, dangerous turning to and from, and bicycle safety. So you'll notice none of those were like, let's just get you all to drive down this corridor faster. That was not an option. And that's good, because that's not what's going to happen. The top 3 were, sorry, just really quick. The top 3 were pedestrian safety, managing speeds, and on-street parking conflicts. So those were what was the key focus going into these concepts. Crash frequency, you know better than I do. This is just data, the crash frequency and the near misses that are not captured by this crash frequency. If the crash didn't happen, but it almost happened, it's not in this data. We know the corridor has had its safety problems in the past. There are 3 very high crash intersections, Brewster Street, Ellsworth, and Orland and Albion, which were also focus intersections for these concept plans. So we kind of ended on this at the last meeting, the preliminary concepts and where they might fit, because we had, if you remember, 6 different cross sections, but we showed one, for instance, that didn't have on-street parking. What do you mean we're going to take out on-street parking? The goal was to take out on-street parking where it is least utilized or not utilized. And as we've received feedback that you need parking back in certain sections or it needs to modify, we've been trying to do that. So I just heard of another section tonight that, down by the bars may need that on-street parking that's currently not shown. Again, this is a plan that will be documented into the study that this needs to be accounted for. Potentially overnight parking demand needs to be accounted for. But the goal was to show you that it wasn't to ever remove parking. It was to remove parking where it's unsafe, so right at the corners of intersections, and also to remove it where it is not used because the land use does not need on-street parking, or in the case of closer to Albion, not even a parking lane, just a very wide shoulder that really still continues to encourage that speeding. So taking that out, and what can we do with that space? So that was where we got the streetscaping idea. So this was to kind of lay out for you where we were going to do things and why we were going to do that. Since this meeting, what you'll see finalized in this, and then I'm going to walk through, includes everything that's here with the exception of the bike lane against the curb. It's not to say it can't happen or it won't happen. It's still included as an alternative in all of our documentation. But with the bike lane on the curbside, we were not able to put in as much parking and have turning lanes at intersections. And because we're going down to only 2 lanes in either direction, those turning lanes are very critical to keeping your traffic flow moving. So the trade-off had to be that the bike could not be against the curb lane. Now, when you get an engineer on board to do that with a survey, they may be able to fit something in differently than what we can from a high-level planning look at it, which is why it's not gone. It's just one red line, but that's why it's not currently shown on these plans. Okay, and then potential circulation changes. If you walk around, they're a little bit more discreet here. They have a whole section of our report dedicated to the circulation changes. So if you're concerned about which road is one way or two way in the proposal, please look at the draft report online and eventually the final, it'll have a nice clear explanation for you. There's a couple major ones that I want to point out. It's a little hard to see here, but at Albion and Orland and Burr, that intersection is very complicated. There's too many movements. We need to take movements away from it in order to make it safer. In this case, we had Albion one way away, and you would come out here at this traffic light at Warden. And then also Burr would have a roundabout way of getting back out and away from the intersection as well to create less turning movements here. There is a new circulation change since the last time we were in front of you. We had to make all of the traffic signals work with the current traffic demand, even though we're hoping less people will be on the road cutting through in the future. This traffic light now.
Sorry.
This traffic light now is complex because it's skewed. And the other issue I had was it was very difficult for a pedestrian because a left turn wouldn't see where the crosswalks were. So
What street are you living on?
this is
Warden.
Whittier away, and Warden is here still two way. Yeah, so Whittier is one way away. I will say that there is a traffic signal added here to help with that flow so that you can get out. But we needed to make this intersection less complex in order to make it safer because the crosswalk was not visible with that skew. We also have a lot of people cutting down Orland today because they're not able to continue down this road here and to reverse. So this was on the last plan, so that's still the same circulation change and again, a traffic signal. This allowed us to take out the, I said this to someone else too, there's mid-block crossings, you have 3 right now along the corridor. They have the nice flashing signs, they're meant to improve safety, but nothing safer than a protected crossing where there can't be cars because it's protected. We were able to replace 2 of the 3 mid-block crossings with fully signalized traffic signal crossings. So more opportunities to cross the corridor and more opportunities to do it safely. Then down, the other major circulation change was down at Brewster Street. There is a 1-block section at Brewster Street that is northbound only. There would be a traffic light at Jetland Street now, that is one of your mid-block crossings, to allow the left turns onto Jetland and onto School, which is actually the proper drop off for School. And that allows Brewster to be less complicated with turning cars and more space for pedestrians. So timeline since the last public engagement, I think I've said a lot of the things I've done, so it's pretty clear we've done a lot of things. We refined our design concepts based on the comments we received. There's several blocks of parking that we've put back in that I'll show you meet what you were asking for last time, or specific comments I received on parking. And then we are advanced these to the corridor concept that you see here today to pursue as a source of future funding. So I'll talk about the funding when we get to the end of the presentation. So the corridor concept plan and recommendations. Okay, and then really quickly, that's okay, I know what's under that. Really quickly, did everyone get a chance? Is there anyone that didn't get a chance to look at the boards a little bit more closely? Not that I'm not going to go through this, but just want to make sure everyone got a chance to see it a little bit closer. It's going to be a little bit blurry on a screen. So please, if you didn't have a chance to walk around. So what are we doing? What are the key elements of it? Road diet. This is one of the key elements, right? So you have 4 lanes of traffic. We are reducing to 2 lanes of traffic with turning lanes, either 2-way turning lanes or turning lanes at intersections. Narrower travel lanes. There was a question that came up about how we're going to reduce speed. We're going to reduce speed by narrowing the travel lanes so that it doesn't feel as easy to drive on. When you get on a highway, that travel lane might be 15+ feet wide. That's why I can drive that fast, because my margin of error, if I'm not paying attention for a second, is I'm still within my lane. The more we narrow it, the more you have to pay attention. So the travel lanes on all of these are 11 feet wide. So that is notably narrower than most of your travel lanes today. Improving on-street parking. So there is definitely sections that the parking was removed for streetscaping or it was underutilized, but the parking lane that is provided along the entire corridor is the proper 8-foot wide parking lane. So right now, where your parking lane is 6 feet wide and the car sticks out into the road, here the parking lane is the full width of a car and you can actually get your car into it. Simplified traffic patterns at intersections. This is kind of what I spoke about with the changing the direction of the circulation, and bus pullover space. So all of these have dedicated, because we only have 1 lane in either direction, we have to provide the space for the bus to board and unboard so that they're not blocking traffic consistently. So that has been provided up and down the corridor. For pedestrians, for active transportation, we have a dedicated bike lane through the entire stretch of roadway. In many sections, it's protected with some form of a buffer lane. There are pedestrian curb extensions. There are about 56 curb extensions. They're on nearly every corner of every intersection up and down the corridor. The size of these boards make them look small. They are at least 8 feet wide and at least 25 feet long. They are a full parking space dedicated to having more view leaving side streets and at intersections. And they're shown here with plantings. There's all kinds of different green infrastructure that you can do in those. Pedestrian countdown signals. You can't see signals at these. Also, signals aren't that fun to look at, but every single signal would have a pedestrian countdown timer. It will be ADA accessible. It will likely be audible. I did get the question if it was audible. That's about to be law. So they will be audible. They will be lit up and they will count you down. No more of the button that says push for green and you have no idea when you're allowed to cross. It will count you down. And dedicated bike lanes, as I mentioned before. The green infrastructure, yes, the median is removed through the entire corridor. There was a discussion of places that maybe limited median could help with people not over taking liberties in the two-way turn lanes. So there's not necessarily no infrastructure that could ever go in the center of the road. But what we've done is show the potential by moving that green infrastructure to the sidewalks and expanding the sidewalks. We were able to put a full large tree canopy, not the larger space you have dedicated, the larger you can have the tree actually grow. And we've shown different size trees for that reason. The trees that are shown on the side are not the same size as the ones that are in your median. They could be much larger if we were to expand that sidewalk space.
Okay.
So I'll just start at one end and work my way down a little bit. So starting at the Fairfield town border, this section, and this was a section that was discussed actually a lot tonight, which is nice because I think Rooster was my primary discussion the last meeting, but here there was opportunities to park. It was either not signed or not utilized. We did a parking demand analysis, but it was during the day. It was during peak hours. It was during retail. What I've heard is that this is in a bar area and there are cars that park here. So right now what you're seeing is a streetscape that allows an expanded sidewalk and a tree canopy. With a two-way turn lane, because there's a lot of curb cuts on this section of road. And if we don't let cars turning get out of your way, there's going to be a constant stop, go flow going down the corridor. This is not, again, engineered and going into construction tomorrow. There's an opportunity to not expand the sidewalk in certain spaces if the community felt once this got into design and did that public meeting that the parking was of higher priority. But we're showing it here as to the potential to not need as much on-street parking, whether that's through other opportunities, but the focus of this study is safety and pedestrian accommodations, and we wanted to show what was possible as far as a sidewalk extension and a walkable streetscape down this section of road. There's bus pullovers, there's little bus symbols, it's a little bit better to see there. Expanded tree canopy and the two-way turn lane. So the two-way turn lane is for all of those curb cuts. As I mentioned, there's a conversation of what prevents someone from using the two-way turn lane as a speeding throughput lane. The goal is that that doesn't really get you anywhere because at any point someone is turning from the other direction and there's a lot of curb cuts. So we don't have two-way turn lane going down this entire corridor. In most places, it's a dedicated left turn lane, but there are so many curb cuts here and enough opportunities to turn that it's really meant as a space to get people out of the way. And if it's used as such, it won't serve a purpose of bypassing.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How does that tie into the changes that Fairfield is making?
Yes, so Fairfield, that's a great point. So Fairfield is also working through a road diet and a corridor concept. This would tie in with what they've laid out. So they are doing something very similar. It doesn't necessarily look exactly like this. They don't have as much planting in some of the spaces because they're more limited right of way. But they are also not going to have 4 lanes. If they move forward with their plan, they will also not have 4 lanes of traffic.
And what's the timing on that? Same as ours?
I do not have the timing on that or if they have received their funding.
Yeah, they've gone.
They finished their planning
They've gone through
process.
design.
Okay, fantastic. So on the next section of corridor, starting at kind of the first traffic light we have on the corridor, it is similar. I think what I would largely want to point out here is that the curbside parking picks back up where there was curbside parking today. There was one section for anyone at the last public meeting in front of the U-Haul that there was originally not going to be proposed parking. Put the parking lane back in. We heard that it was regularly used and that our study just didn't capture that use. So change the transition of that area a little bit, but it still maintains the bike lanes and put that parking back in. So right now, wherever there is parking today, there is parking in this stretch of roadway, the exceptions being at corners. Right now, your parking signs don't say, don't park from here to corner. You have cars that go right up to the corner. That is not safe. You can't see pedestrians. So all of those spaces are inherently removed to provide this safe view. But that is the one space on either side at every single corner of every single intersection. We've also shown, you could stripe your parking lane. I got the question about the Ts and actually showing where the parking spaces are. You can do that. Again, this is just a visual. This isn't a final design where you could mark off the spaces or you could just have the one delineated lane. One of the things you'll notice that we did show, just to give you a visual, was all of the curb cuts. We showed striping that said, do not park here. There is a curb cut. So that's what all these diagonal lines are, so that we would fit a car between them, but we would just delineate to people, you cannot park any closer than this to this driveway. People need to be able to get in and out. You want to do the next one? Okay. So the major changes here, and I talked about a little bit about the circulation. Jetland Street is a fully signalized intersection now with the left turns occurring at Jetland onto School Street. There is no opportunity to make a left turn at Brewster Street. I know you just recently got expanded curb extensions. These are much larger than what you have out there. So I know you have them there and you're thinking, is this just the same? No, because since we're taking lanes away, we're able to put that curb extension much further into the roadway. And I want to show you a picture of that on this slide here. So this has a better before and after snapshot of the corridor over here. We've got the rendering over here, but there isn't the before next to it. So this is if you're standing in the same space again, you can see the bump out right here, and it takes like a little bit of a lane. This is basically an additional 7 or 8 feet just on this side of extension of curb. It would allow for plantings. You can see that even without the median, like particularly again, some of your median has some beautifully planted and has some trees in it, but a lot of your median also doesn't. It's just concrete, and it's concrete that cars have been driving up on and deteriorating. So by putting a lot of planting on the sides, you can still have opportunities for green infrastructure even without a median. The crossing right here, this is the crossing if you were at the school. Over on all of these boards, if you look at them afterwards, there's a little eyeball that tells you where you're standing, which is a little helpful from an orientation standpoint. But this crosswalk is only about 8 feet wide right now, because we were able to make that street one way. And then just a larger view, especially on this screen, it's a little bit harder to look at, but just a second to kind of take in that the whole from a safety, like I got the question too, how do we make it safe? How do we guarantee it's safer? We can't guarantee anything because I can never prevent someone that decided that today was the day they wanted to drive 100 miles per hour. I can make it very, very difficult for them to drive 100 miles per hour, but I can't stop someone from doing it. What I can do, what I have done in most of these sections, and we've worked really hard to do, is shorten the pedestrian crossings as much as possible, limiting the time that you would be in a conflict zone with a vehicle. So all of these crosswalks are notably shorter than what is out there today, and they are fully striped out and very visible. From effectively from Brewster, I know it's Broadway, but from Brewster to Ellsworth, there is no turning center lane. The goal is that these are more minor side streets. We didn't want to provide places, again, trying to limit the opportunities for someone to use it as a cut through and a bypass. A nice, fully protected bike lane as much as possible, buffered all the way up to almost Ellsworth, where we have to put our turning lane back in. Streetscaping. This is our one remaining mid-block crossing on the corridor. And Lindsay, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide where you can see kind of what it would feel like to now use that mid-block crossing versus what it feels like to use that today. So this is the existing mid-block crossing here. And I wanted to be able to see both at the same time, but I should have made it bigger because the size of that person versus the size of this person, that crossing is very, very long today. It's all asphalt. You're going across effectively 5 lanes, half of a parking lane that's not wide enough, 2 lanes, and another half a parking lane that's not wide enough. Here, we have just 2 lanes, the buffered bike lanes, so you do have to look for bicyclists first, but you've got bicycle, then you've got 2 lanes of traffic and a bicycle, and then you've got full curb extensions, a huge amount of opportunity to do planting, continue your paver strips, put in more street trees. So you have a nice canopy today, but again, even in another one of those instances where that center median right now has a square piece of grass in it. So you can replace a lot of this green infrastructure by doing these bioswale curb extensions, green infrastructure opportunities.
Marissa, can you just explain the striping on the side of the bike lane, the buffer space?
Yes, so there's a couple places you'll see it where it comes and goes on it. The buffer space is to try to make it so that if there's a parked car and they open their door, the bicyclist is not hit by it. Similarly, on the traveling lane, there's a buffer space from the vehicle to the car. We've put that in as many opportunities as possible. Someone also mentioned to me, what about something that actually prevents cars from getting in the bike lane? It's not ruled out. Again, this isn't final design. It's written up into the report that maybe delineators could be used or other materials. And it needs to be explored as part of an engineering concept. So we've laid the ground for someone to explore that further with the survey that tells them where the water drains and all of that information. And then again, another blow up of the space too. The curb extensions making this crosswalk much shorter. The same retroreflective signs as well. From Ellsworth, again, Martin, from Ellsworth to Belmont Ave, we really get back into streetscape, but this was another comment we got at the public hearing. There are places along Fairfield Avenue, the majority of the roadway from Ellsworth to Albion does not need on-street parking. There is a lot of off-street parking, but there are short blocks that do need it. There are a couple of houses that actually don't have any form of a driveway. There's a couple of retail spaces that they utilize that. This concept has been refined since we saw you at the last public meeting to put back in any existing necessary on-street parking. So if someone had a driveway, it's a house, it's right on the street, they have a driveway that can fit 3 cars in it, and then they have an on-street parking space in front of it, that was not considered a need. But if there was retail and that was their primary form of parking, then it is still here. If there was not a driveway, there is still a parking space in front of or very closely adjacent to that property. So that was put back in. Otherwise, we've expanded the sidewalk as much as possible, put in green infrastructure, tried to show the opportunities for plantings, the 2-way turn lanes. And I mentioned the circulation changes earlier, so I won't re-go through that, but there's more evenly spaced traffic signals to improve the traffic flow and create more opportunities for safe crossings on this section of roadway, particularly just to come here with a lot of the counselors telling us on the very first meeting we had that they walk students from the schools over here. So more safe pedestrian crossings. And then finally, Warden and Avenue to Pine Street. At some point, this road diet, at least from our scope, has to end. It went to Railroad Avenue. Connecticut DOT and the primary traffic generator right now is that ramp coming off at Railroad Ave, has a lot of traffic on it. Going down to 1 lane right there will not allow enough people to get off that ramp. So the 2 lanes that exist today in either direction is carried up to Albion and Orland, which would be kind of the beginning of the entryway to this space. And as such, we did everything we could to make that very complicated intersection smaller, tighter, and with more green infrastructure at it. With that, a little bit more of a bird's eye view. And this one I really like in particular too, because there is a lot of confusing pavement. It's effectively 2 stepped intersections today. We are going to pull it down. We are going to shorten it. We are going to make all of the crossings dedicated, visible, notably shorter than what they are today. I know that there was a conversation like there's a median today though. The median is still crossing 2 lanes of traffic and it's only 6 feet wide when those cars are flying by you. Now you only need to cross 2 lanes. So you're done. You don't need a median because you're only crossing 2 lanes. So that's an opportunity. More opportunities for green infrastructure. And if you look at the one that will be a little bit easier to see, actually just go to the next slide, would you? Because it's bigger. Relocation of the bus stop to the far side of the intersection so it doesn't block traffic, and just showing the opportunities for a bus shelter, for a space to be. This is a very utilized bus stop from our field observations, and we want people to be able to encourage to take transit and have it be comfortable to take transit, and that's what we need to do. This whole corner is also had all this green built out, took all that pavement away that was previously there, adjacent to the Wendy's for, the high speed turns that are occurring today. what is it gonna cost? This is what we think it's gonna cost right now. It's a preliminary study, so we build a lot of contingency into this. I've heard of varying things from that's so expensive to it's so cheap. There's a lot of differences in this. But I will say that there is a similar corridor in downtown Stanford that they are doing this level of work on, in similarity, and their gauge on that one right now that's a little bit further ahead from this one is 25 million. This is a little bit longer and a little bit complicated at some of these larger intersections and circulation changes. This in total is right around $30.1 million in total. The most expensive strip being from Railroad Avenue to Ellsworth, and that's because the sidewalk extensions take a lot of engineering work to extend sidewalk and change where stuff drains, but also all those intersections I showed you that were changing, like Albion and Orland and that redoing of the intersection. These are construction costs. So that does not include, a lot of people also noted there's no utilities shown on the plans. There's still an opportunity to vary the utility. It's not shown into the plans. It works with the plans. The plans are designed around utility. But the cost of varying utility can oftentimes be prohibitive. And for right now, we can't estimate what would be required to do that in a planning study. So it's excluded from this. Engineering costs, that engineer that's going to come in and design this for a handful of years. Streetscaping, we showed you all the plantings, but as this isn't a detailed plan, I can't tell you exactly what the planting costs would be, depending on how you would want to go about doing it. And property acquisitions. So if some of you have been to all these meetings, you'll remember the roundabout. It's still documented in the report. However, the roundabout had a notable amount of property acquisition. So we wanted to give you a plan that if you got funding tomorrow, you could do in a shorter window. Because what we heard from a lot of people too was I don't want this to have to take 30 years or more, and property acquisition can be limiting. So it's still an option if the property becomes available to the community, but if in the meantime, there's an alternative, and that's where we went with for the preferred plan. How do you go about putting this in? So on the next slide.
Can I?
Yeah,
Just a
absolutely.
quick question, I understand it's a very conceptual plan and pricing is very, very conceptual, but what did you say, 30? Is that what roughly above?
Roughly. In total.
Roughly.
Yep.
The exclusions,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm looking at this, I'm thinking the sidewalks would be part of this conceptual plan, right? So if we take that, I'm just trying to understand, globally what this, is it double that? Historically, to buy property, to get engineers, to get design, to vary utilities,
Mhm.
is that number really double that, triple that? I'm sure it's a much bigger number to do it right.
Well, this is still proposed to be done right. It's more a matter of like, the reason I don't have buried utilities as a construction cost is because there's a lot of other hoops you need to jump through to bury the utility, and you may not be able to, and you're not technically required to as part of this plan. So I can't give you a cost of burying utility because I don't know if you're even going to be allowed to bury the utility and what that would do to anyone. The sidewalks, what I meant by full replacement of sidewalk is all the extensions of sidewalks. Every time we touch the sidewalk, you do have to replace to put it all together, and repair would be part of that. But what I'm saying is we would not dig the sidewalk back to the building and re-put the entire thing in. So you would meld the new into the old with repairs. If I go about replacing all of that sidewalk, it obviously adds an additional cost. It will not double it because you're still doing an entire road today, but it will add a third of the cost to just replacing all of the sidewalks as well with all the grading and dealing with the properties, because then you will get very close to property lines and you'll need to deal with property owners at that point. Acquisition, I also cannot estimate for you. What I can say is on the roundabout side of things, the roundabout, which would need property acquisition, the roundabout on its own is going to cost $6 to $8 million just as a roundabout. Nothing that we're showing you requires property acquisition. So I don't need to put the cost in or tell you it's going to double it because none of these plans require property acquisition as they're proposed. An engineering design fee is generally 10%, not including survey, maybe 15% of it. So if the construction is 30 million, you're looking at engineering of 3 to 5 million. So it will not double the cost to have an engineer design.
That helps a lot, thank you.
Implementation. So there's a lot of like, I want this now and I want these pieces now. The one element of this is that the core, the background of this whole project is a road diet. We're going from 4 lanes to 1 lane in either direction. We cannot do, and we can't, all those curb extensions, all that beautiful planting that we're doing is because we're taking lanes away to put things into that old asphalt space. Until we take the lanes away, we can't just put in the curb extensions at that full size because they're gonna take up half the road that's supposed to be a travel lane right now. You basically have to do the road diet to get all of the other improvements if you're gonna do the plan as a whole. So you can't start with the little stuff and do the big stuff with a road diet. You also can't just do 2 blocks here, 2 blocks here, 2 blocks here. So you think about it, like I'm driving down this road, I got 4 lanes. Oh, we all left to merge, I have 1 lane. Okay, now I got 4 lanes and now I'm gonna go back to 1 lane. So you can't do that either. So what are we proposing for implementation? We gave 2 basic options. You can do option 1, which is prioritizing the highest crash locations. In that situation, you would start with Ellsworth Street and Railroad, that as you might remember was the most expensive section. You would do that first and you would work your way down to the Fairfield line in order. Okay, that would also require the largest initial startup funds if you were going to do this in steps. I think the goal of this, while we're talking about that, would be the implementation, and that's likely going to be what the engineer proposes as to how they're going to construct it. In the perfect world, you do all of the funding at one time, you do the entire stretch of road designed at one time, and you may construct it in phases. Just because designing in pieces means a longer wait time before when the next piece can go in. You have to re-onboard another engineer and do another piece. So we're not suggesting that. I'm just saying if you needed to step this, this is how you would go about stepping it. The other option is you prioritize the higher pedestrian area. So in that instance, we're going to talk about Davidson to Brewster Street and all the connections to the schools. Because I kind of started in the middle, you have to walk in either direction. To the Fairfield line is the lowest priority in the sense that there's the least amount of pedestrian activity. So you would step your way to Railroad Avenue and then you would go back and do that last segment. Again, neither perfectly ideal. In a world, you do all of this together and that might just be how you construct it, but it gives you an idea of how you could break it up if needed. Or if only certain parts were desirable to diet. Again, if you want to just do the downtown section or other pieces in future, you have that ability. Next steps. So we are finalizing a report. There's a draft report online right now that went to Connecticut DOT for their feedback. We have some comments from them. As I mentioned, they do not change what we showed you, which is why we showed it to you because we're not going to remake the wheel. We are finalizing their comments, finalizing feedback we hear now to make sure that we list anything that you bring up as possible opportunities in the future as much as possible into the report. And that will go on the website as a final report. And then the city and stakeholders can utilize this final report to seek funding. A lot of projects get funding with lesser studies or no studies at all. So you're in a great position to seek funding. And your stakeholders are all been involved in this process. And the advancing the corridor plan recommendation concepts into engineering and design and construction. So once the funding is secured, and I was talking to folks about this too, once the funding is secured, your next step is engineering, design, and construction. I was also asked how long, so I will just generally say that, again, a similar corridor that I can draw attention to that received the similar amount of funding in the downtown section is about to start. Its engineering design is currently projecting 3 to 4 years for design of the project. It has to go through environmental considerations. Once you go into design, it's a long process with Connecticut DOT and their roadway and federal funding. It's a 4-year design process, and then it is multiple years of construction because the construction season is April to November. And as you can imagine, this is a lot of work and they will not be able to do it in one season. You might get one section in seasons because you do have a nice MPT of where you can, protection of traffic where you can step it in. But you're also probably looking at 2 to 3 years of construction in a perfect world. So with that, I think reasonably you're looking at it for when your start of funding, you're looking at anywhere from a 7 to 10 year process for the full build out of something of this size. And again, it could be modified and it could be designed differently in the future, and that design could be faster to implement. So I don't want to necessarily say that it's definitely going to take this long or it's going to take less or more, but this particular plan, if it went fully to construction at that speed, is probably going to take that many years. Questions? Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question, like if there was a category 3